Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of DEI After 5. So this week, we're going to do something that's a little bit different than we've done before. You know, as we're doing diversity and inclusion work, I often talk about organizations, specific organizations or companies that are doing the work as individual entities. But there are a group of organizations that are associations, that are member-based organizations that impact the larger industry. And so today, my guest is Ahmad Thomas, who is the CEO of Silicon Valley Leadership Group. If you followed me, if you know anything about me, I spent the last 10 years of my career in tech. So this is an area that I am just waiting to dive into, because that is something that's very near and dear to my heart. So Ahmad, welcome to today's show.
Thank you, Sacha. Really honored to be here with you.
Wonderful. So for anyone who does not know you or the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, can you tell us a bit about you and the organization?
Sure. Well, I could try and very high level cover the organization, starting with our history. So we go back to the late 1970s. David Packard of Hewlett Packard founded this association. At the time, we were about 30 companies, large businesses in the Valley. And you fast forward to today, and we're over 10 times that size. So virtually every major technology employer in Silicon Valley is a part of our member-based association. We really strive to make the Valley a better place to do business. But in the environment we're operating in, that's not enough, right? So we have a call to action, which is really ushering in that new era of Silicon Valley leadership, which I know we'll speak to, in which equity is a key component.
Yeah, I know we're going to dive into that. You know, for me, so like I said, I spent 10 years of my career in the tech industry, worked for large companies, worked for a startup right there in the Valley. And so I've kind of seen all aspects of kind of the tech world, particularly when it comes to diversity and inclusion, right? I was the first Black female that was hired by the startup company. And so there were some challenges that came along with that. So tell me a little bit about, you know, the organization that you're a part, that you're leading, and what you all are doing to kind of influence DEI across tech.
Yeah, so for us, and your background is so impressive, Sacha. For me, I've got a big corporate background. Investment banking is where the majority of my career was spent, and I also understand public policy and started my career on Capitol Hill. But for me, that skill set is relevant here because we're trying to operationalize change, right? So when we talk about DEI issues, these are money issues for me. How can we, at our core, how can we make our companies in this region, this valley, more competitive? And I believe companies that get inclusion and belonging right, companies that have diverse teams that are able to integrate well and be high performing, ultimately drive the highest value for their companies. So that is core to everything that we do and core to the mission. It's making these companies more competitive. Now, I would say that representation for us is focused primarily around board diversity, a big focus related to representation at the executive levels, just because we believe there's such a multiplier effect when you have a leader of color, and the changes that they can make in relatively short order at the top or in that management layer. Health equity, when we really drill down into the more granular topics, is an area where we focus and see really high impact. But we believe that there are a number of not just the programs and initiatives that we're associated with, but there are a number of key opportunities where right now the core question is, are you taking your pedal off your foot off the gas pedal, given the volatile environment and everything going on at a macro level, or are you really leaning in to drive that change? And that's where the honest conversations, I think, are occurring right now.
So, in full transparency, a lot of the work.
Follow every time you say that, you make me a little nervous, Sasha. But
I mean, no, it's DEI after 5. But no, one of the challenges that I know I face. So, and let me kind of step back. When I was in tech, my job was nothing to do with diversity and inclusion at all, right? I was doing marketing for these tech companies, specifically field marketing. And what happened was I noticed that I was the only, right? I was dealing with certain issues. And so DEI, I picked it back up because I had kind of put it aside. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do tech marketing for a while. And I noticed, especially in the larger company, that there was very few conversation that was happening kind of in the middle, right? Some executives were talking about it, and there were some grassroots things that were happening. I say this even happened in the startup, but the day-to-day middle management pieces of it, there was very few conversations that were taking place. And so, when you said earlier, you're focused on the board and the executive leaders, what are you all doing, or what's the idea around like trickling this down, or how to empower some of those middle managers to kind of pick up the gauntlet, with this?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And Sasha, when I come on here with you, I'm trying to throw the talking points out the window and really focus not just on lived experience, but I hope speaking very authentically. And I think there are a couple challenges that come to mind with this middle management layer, right? But me as a CEO, I can sit at the top of the mountain and preach all day, but if you don't have a strong middle management layer that's actually able to implement what you're talking about, you've got a problem. And you've got, I think, several companies. One that comes immediately to mind is HP with Enrique Lores, where he's really worked to put an incentive structure in place that can help middle managers get aligned, and I think make decisions to make that company more competitive in reaching their inclusion and belonging goals. So I think there's a lot that you can do to begin to drive the type of impact that you would like to see. But where I think it gets deeper, and this is where, hopefully we'll be real here, is with latent bias. I think the challenges we deal with, and I'm not talking about tech here, I'm speaking about corporate America generally, right? My dad is born and raised in the Deep South in rural Alabama, where life was not great in the 50s and 60s in particular. And at that time, you had signs on the door, right? In 2023, you've got, this person might not have a good attitude, or we just don't quite connect with her the same way as we do here. I just don't see the same type of potential.
They're not a cultural fit.
Right. And so that's much, much harder than the sign on the door, right? Those latent biases. And I think being able to call them out. And I think the companies that set a culture and environment in place that allows you or a Black woman on the team to go to a manager and say, you know what, I was called out because of X, Y, and Z, and I don't think I'm behaving any differently than my peer group, and I think this needs to be addressed, right? I think that's where you can get culture right and begin to change management. There's the incentives, there's the structures, there's all of that good stuff where you have a lot of data around what works. But I'm trying to speak to where I think there are opportunities to drive change that maybe has more of an impact on the day-to-day lives of some of our leaders, our employees of color.
Yeah. As you're talking, what really was coming to my mind was some of it is also representation, right? Just showing that there's someone from a different background that is doing the work and being successful in the work, and that they're not just the only, right? They're the outlier. Right. There are others out there. In my last, corporate role, where I led inclusion marketing for a tech company, we had a program called We Power Tech. And the whole idea was to talk about how underrepresented communities indeed powered tech. Like we were the heartbeat. We could be the heartbeat
Yeah.
of the industry. And that was, from engineering to whatever it was, AI and machine learning and all of these things, and showing how we were doing that same work, right? So that we weren't the outliers. So as you're talking, that's kind of what I'm seeing. And that's how you kind of combat some of that bias as well, because you start to break down some of those stereotypes. You start to break down some of those cultural norms of what people are expecting or what they assume to
Right.
be, someone that should be in a certain role. So that's what was coming to me as you were saying that.
I think
Yep.
that's so well put, Sasha. And I think there are multiple levels here. Maybe if you really boil it down, you've got macro and micro. I think at the micro level, when you look at representation, what is it? What is this magic you see in leaders of color, where they just happen to build diverse teams? What is this secret sauce? And I don't think it's that
Right.
complicated. I think that there's some real intentionality to what, if I look at myself, what I try to do in my leadership role. But I think due to lived experience, often some of the latent biases that are a reality just don't exist in the same manner with some of those leaders. That's the micro level where you begin to see benefits of getting diverse leaders in key roles in your company. I think the macro level is you have this entire movement around, ESG. ESG is a multi-trillion-dollar market from the investment standpoint, but also from a governance standpoint. You have large shareholders and important voices that demand that their companies get this right. Now, ESG has become this four-letter word, and it's very politicized. And
Yeah.
we can dig into that if you want to. I would just say I'm focused on trying to drive as much revenue as possible for our companies. And I know that the empirical data truly is incontrovertible, that more diverse teams and companies that get inclusion and belonging right are more successful and make more money. And that to me is, as a shareholder or as someone connected to these companies, if you have that data, it's just not smart to not try and capitalize upon those opportunities. Unfortunately, we get a lot of opportunities.
Yeah. But I think it's what's so important about what you just said is the data is there, right? And it's not a superficial look at the data, because there's so many organizations that say, okay, diversity drives, profits and innovation. But it's not just the diversity. It's how people from these diverse backgrounds and experiences feel valued and seen and heard and connected and engaged in the organization. So it's the equity and inclusion part. It's the belonging part. It's like all of those things need to be in place. And, psychological safety, all the other stuff, work that I do is tied in to that's where innovation happens, right? When individuals feel psychologically safe, that's where innovation happens. And once you have that innovation, then you start to see that multiplier effect on the bottom line. And so what you said was just so critical is, yes, diverse teams are important, but it's almost with an asterisk. Like, it's not just the Black and brown or disabled butts in seats. It's their experience as well, too, that drives that innovation. It's the rest of that work.
And that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Right. The representation piece, I do believe, certainly in Silicon Valley, that we're making strides, and strides that are significant, both empirically and emotionally, and via the way we're talking about these issues. I think what we're talking about here is a management issue that usually comes down to that one-to-one experience, right? Often the data you will see reflects that someone's experience as an employee of the company is dictated by their manager. Right? Yeah. It's not, clearly a company's culture, the values, the work that you do, none of that can be discounted. And that's critical to recruitment and retention. But when you look at data about what drives people away, it's often connected to their
Manager.
experience with that manager.
Yeah,
Right.
it's absolutely. And you know, one of the things that I've actually been doing for a while has been focusing on that middle manager, which is why, you know, I brought that up earlier, because it's such a critical part of the experience in this work and how it gets done. You know, for you as an executive kind of in this space and as a part of the organization that you're a part of, you know, how are you all influencing the leaders and the executives at your member companies um, to continue to do this work, right? And to be kind of the change agents
Yeah.
for tech.
Well, yeah, and I view myself as a change agent. Actually, I don't think it's by choice. I think it's kind of the set of circumstances,
Yeah.
the opportunity that I'm fortunate to have, and what comes with that, which is pretty heavy, actually. But I think about, so we've got the programs, the initiatives, a lot of work that's either in a pilot stage or we've got successful iterations moving. But I think of two things that come to mind. One is the way that we speak about these issues and show up. And I think a second piece is around being iterative and innovative. So let me speak to grace and let me speak to iterating. I believe, and I need to do a better job here. I had a great conversation with Van Jones, which is up online, and Van really dug into this in a manner that was so understandable and relatable to me, and I think those in the audience. But if you have a product XYZ, you get your beta out, you iterate, you go through 100 different versions, and you've got something ready, and you're ready to rock. With DEI, we don't have that same grace. Oh, well, I took approach number one. I've only got one Black employee and one Latina employee. Well, DEI, it's tough. So what?
And work, right.
Iterate, treat this just like you would any product, and maybe have more grace around it, given the cultural components and the complexities here. I think taking that same business mindset, we're business leaders in this role, we're operationalizing change, right? Taking that mindset to this work, I think can lead to better results. And speaking about it in that way can lead to better results. I think it also leads to better emotional states around this, right? Because you look at post the murder of George Floyd and COVID, and just life is not easy, and it is particularly not easy in many environments for your employees of color. Even just the challenges that you run into with the traffic stop, that might hit certain employees very differently. And I think showing that grace around DEI can, ironically, probably lead to building a better culture and retaining those employees you're trying to help. So what I'm saying very directly is, if you have program A that failed, handling that, I'd say failed in quotations, handling that the right way and iterating and building upon that. We've got a startup program with SVLG that we've gone through 3 different iterations. No big deal. It's getting better and better each go round. But dropping it is not even part of our mindset. And I think with DEI, maybe productizing it is the right word, but treating it more like many of our business priorities could probably lead to better results and better mental states and well-being around it.
I appreciate you using the term grace, right? So because we don't give a lot of people grace in this. And so I always talk about, grace and space. Let's give grace and space, because sometimes even before we go to the next iteration, we need time to just reflect and understand, okay, well, what didn't work and why didn't it work? And, just really trying to understand those things. And so I think it's so important to bring that up. But it also, the word I wrote down as you were talking was humanity, right? Like, we're human. We're flawed. Nothing is perfect. And so how do you bring back the humanness into this work?
But
so making sure. Yeah.
I want to ask a follow-up there, because grace is inherently very spiritual. What do you mean when you say grace and grace connected to DEI?
Yeah, grace in space. So I say it meaning understanding that people are flawed, understanding that people will make mistakes, understanding that it's not going to be one checking a box that's going to fit for everyone, right? So the grace to be able to iterate, as you were just saying, the grace to be able to shift, right? Pivot if necessary. To understand, like, okay, who did we leave out in this first iteration, right? And so it's just that understanding that it's not going to be perfect. So when I talk about grace, that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, and I think there's also forgiveness. I think is too strong a word, but when this work becomes so personal, and it is impossible for it not to be,
Right.
just given what we're talking about here, to me, extending that grace also tries to remove a layer of that personal connection in a manner which is more focused on the product,
Right.
and the end result, and iterating around said product or program, as opposed to the person behind it or the people behind it, right? So you can look at it really focused on your data, or look at it in a more empirical manner to try and get to the right result. I believe, I truly think, unfortunately, in Silicon Valley, we're not in other regions of the country where I think this is hotly debated. I think we, and certainly at Silicon Valley Leadership Group, have a very strong core of leaders who want to see this change and understand why it's so important. So we've had, Stephanie Creary at Wharton and Brian Lowry at Stanford are two of my favorite academics and experts connected to these issues, and their work.
I know Stephanie. Yeah.
Stephanie is great. And when we have featured them before, or looking at the work that they have done, their body of work, asking the question about the business case for diversity, like if you're at that point, you're a few steps behind.
Yeah. You're at the very beginning. Yeah.
I started my comments, and maybe presage this a little bit, by speaking about that, because I think that's foundational. But that is not where we are, in my view, in the Valley.
Yeah.
Right? I think our companies often, and this comes with being innovative and working in technology, we're at the tip of the spear, right? So our challenges are in trying to continue to prioritize and operationalize this. But I think that there are other regions and other companies and other industries where they're not as fortunate to be where we are. So I also want to acknowledge that.
You know, as soon as you said that, the term fail fast.
Yeah.
Like, that's just such a tech Silicon Valley term, but that's what it is, right? It's like, let's fail, but let's move forward. Like, let's continue again, that iteration toward this goal. Like, we're not just moving to move. We have a goal that we're trying to accomplish. And so how can we get there as quickly as possible? So yes. You also talked about, and I'm just looking, I'm like, oh my gosh, we could go down so many different paths. But I want to kind of talk a little bit about what you said around management issues. And as I'm listening to what you're saying around kind of grace and space, I'm tying it back to also having some of those middle managers and some executives as well to understand that grace is a part of this. Right? There's so many that feel like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I don't want to do the wrong thing. And so I'm not going to say or do anything. And that's been a big part of pushing through this work. You can't just freeze. You have to move forward. You have to do something. And so again, as you were talking, I was making that connection to, do managers have the support that they need to know that grace is there for them?
Well, there's that piece. And as you share that, I also think sometimes you just need to close your mouth and listen. I see, it actually, I think, can be quite frustrating. where you're in rooms, and I'm not speaking to what I do now, but you're in rooms where there's conversations around DEI, and you might have a manager sitting there and talking for an hour and going through a slide deck. I would propose that you might get more out of listening to the women, the employees of color in the room, to actually hear their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And hear about the way that they are being treated, and things that you might not even conceptualize.
Mm-hmm.
Employee A asks people to do it, and they do it. Employee B, the Latina woman, asks and gets some questions. Well, I think I can do it better. Have we considered these 4 things? Why does employee A get no questions for the director, but employee B, right? And sharing that with the manager, saying, you might think that this is an example of an employee being inquisitive and trying to deliver the best product, but actually what I feel, now let me speak for me, I don't speak for
right.
But what I feel as a leader of color is that this is someone who's not listening to me, and they listen to all the other managers. But why, for the one Black manager, do they ask these questions? I don't believe it's innocent.
Yeah.
Right? I believe that I'm not being treated with the same level of respect as my peers, which is contributing to me not being as efficient as I could be. So the reason why I didn't get XYZ done on Tuesday is because I had to schedule a call on Thursday with Jack to talk through his ideas about this.
Mm-hmm.
Bob just sends emails and it all gets done.
Right.
So this is, if you
Right.
just sat and listened to that, I've been in conversations with folks and minds are just blown. And if you get the right manager who's like, whoa, okay, I didn't even see that.
Yeah.
You can begin to drive change that's positive. But again, we're throwing the talking points out the window. It's after 5, and I'm trying to be cool here. But I wish this is just coffee in here, unfortunately. But Sacha, I don't know if you can empathize or connect with that, but that's what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
I'm saying that managers can really learn a lot by listening more effectively.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's sometimes the aha moment, because it does sometimes take a consultant coming in to an organization. And I've had that happen where I've given feedback to a leader and they're like, oh, wow, I never knew that. And the people on their team are saying, we've been telling them that for like months, right? They're not listening. And so sometimes it takes that. Sometimes it's an assessment where people have just an opportunity to just have open-ended questions and they see it in black and white on a piece of paper. And it's like, oh, okay, there are themes here, right? That I'm not necessarily picking up on every single day. The other thing about just the talking, when you said just the presenting for an hour, sometimes that's a defense mechanism because they don't know what else to say. And so I'm just going to do the talking points that people told me to do so I could check a box to say that I did it. But I'm not going to give the space for anyone to give any input because I'm not prepared to be able to respond or answer to those questions. Right. And so that's why I was talking about, do they even have the right support to be able to handle a lot of these issues? Because that support could be coaching. That support could be, how do you listen actively, without having to fix the problem immediately, right? How do you sit in that discomfort? And so some of that support really may look very different than what they've had up until that point. Because I often say that, most managers or people leaders are promoted because of what they can do with widgets, not necessarily what they could do with people. And so you can make, break, sell, buy widgets really well. And so because of that, we'll give you a team, but it has nothing to do with your people skills or your management skills. And so that's the part that I think we're talking about, is how do you empower? And you said that earlier, how do you empower these leaders to be able to do this work in a way where they're comfortable with that discomfort?
Right. The support, the training, the empathy building.
Right.
But this is where now it gets back to the top in leadership. How are your leaders? How's your CEO? How's that leadership team, the board, creating that environment
Right.
where the employees truly feel safe to provide that invaluable feedback that can actually begin to fix what might not be working. And I think that is the core challenge at that management layer, to actually have a culture where people feel safe and can just tell you what's wrong, having managers that are well equipped to listen and take it to the right levels or have the tools to fix it themselves. And, if I look back, the only things that I think, and regret, I don't think it's the right word, but, if I go back 20 years in my career, or when I'm sitting in rooms and maybe don't have the influence and the title that I have now, you keep your mouth shut. I mean, you see something that's going on, and you just don't have the, you talk about managing your own risk profile. Maybe you don't have the leeway to step out like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But if you've got companies and environments where the lowest person on the totem pole feels comfortable going to the manager and saying, you know what, I noticed that the young woman in the corner was trying to make a really good point, but she was the last person to get called on. And when she got called on, there was only 30 seconds left in the meeting, and she didn't get to make her point. Now, I don't know if you didn't see her hand or what, or all the seats around the table were taken by, by the men.
Yeah.
And, it really didn't make me feel good that I'm the same title, but, and being able to set an environment where that can be shared. These might seem like micro cuts, but combined, they drive culture. And I think that is what some companies get very right, and others where there are opportunities.
Absolutely. Ahmad, this is going to be my last question.
Okay.
How do you fill your cup? How do you take care of yourself? That was 2 questions, but yeah.
Yeah. Last question is the hardest one. I don't have a great answer to this. I think understanding. Well, maybe I'd take a step back. I don't look at my professional career, work life in terms of balance. I look at it in terms of trying to achieve better harmony. So I took this course, which I really deeply believe in. The professor is Stu Friedman. He's the author of the book Total Leadership. He's on the Wharton faculty. And he writes of this notion that achieving balance is really not something that's feasible, especially for those in careers like these. But achieving harmony, you know what? From 6:30 to 8, I'm having dinner with my kids, and I know you're doing the same. But at 8:15, could we do a call and knock this thing out? Or the kids go to sleep at 9 o'clock. Can we do a call from 9 to 9:15? Just understanding that maybe for certain people that call is offensive, but for others that call is perfect. Great. I've got a block of time to do what I need to do and manage my family relationships, while I can still not let my work slip. That's just one small example. But I think trying to change my mindset from one where things are perfectly balanced to one where there's more harmony in what I do is creative. Trying to spend more time outdoors. I'm on the board of the National Outdoor Leadership School of Knowles. And I think in communities of color in particular, for a lot of reasons, we do not benefit and get out enough to take advantage of the great restorative power of nature and environment and the outdoors. I did a venture in business school where I went off on a glacier in Alaska as part of National Outdoor Leadership School, and it changed my life. And it was so restorative to be out there disconnected and just part of that natural environment, that trying to do that more often, taking my kids and our dog, my wife on hikes, things like that, where you unplug a little bit outdoors. That's the other piece. I'm filibustering because I don't have a good answer.
No, but that is a great
try to
Great
spend
answer.
hours and
Because it's honest, right? A lot of people, I've had folks come on the show and was like, I suck at taking care of myself. But it's very honest because we all don't necessarily think of harmony, or you mentioned outdoors is such a big part of it. I was kind of chuckling to myself because I just had a conversation last night where I'm going on vacation at the end of the month, and I was saying, my sisters always wanted me to swim with turtles, and I'm like, I'm not swimming with no daggone turtles. But as you were talking, I'm like, there is something that's very peaceful about the water for me.
right.
And so I'm like, well, maybe if I happen to be in the water and there's a turtle that swims by, that would count.
Yeah.
But it's that connecting back to nature. It's just, that is where I find my peace, is near water. And so as you were talking, that kind of came to mind as, yeah, that's just something that I love to do. And as soon as I'm near the water, I find peace.
Sacha, promise me you'll do it. So my mom's from the Caribbean. My mom's West Indian. I've done that in Barbados.
That's where I'm from.
Well, there you go. Another connection. Well, I don't, speaking of connections, I don't connect with sharks. Even, Shark Week and all that. I don't, I keep my distance.
No.
But, so that's been a barrier for me. But when you let that go a little bit and just hop in the ocean, it is, as we were talking about, it's just transformative.
I will have to keep you posted.
Please do.
So Ahmad, how can people connect with you if they wanted to follow up or just kind of get some tips? Because I think, with you being an executive doing what you're doing, that there's so many other executives that may want to just brainstorm with you. So how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so the website is svlg.org. We have got active social channels from our come follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn in particular. We have thought, and leadership pieces that can be of interest. And if you're in the Valley, come check out some of our events. There are great ways to network and hopefully learn and add value. If you're a company that wants to engage and be a member, you can also just connect with us via the website, and we'd be very happy to follow up.
Wonderful. Ahmad, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been fabulous. There's just, my wheels are turning. There's so much more we could talk about. But thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of DEI After 5. As always, you can get us here every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Until next time, have a good one.